Let's begin day 7. Understanding the concepts of autoscaling and instance pool. An e-commerce company experiences rapid data growth due to seasonal traffic spikes. The team needs to ensure batch jobs complete within SLA while avoiding over-provisioning and manual infra management. What options best fulfills these conditions? The clue from the question is they need they have a seasonal traffic spikes, so they need a compute capacity randomly and for a very limited period of time. Again, it's a seasonal traffic spike, so the capacity is unknown. Therefore, the first two could be an answer, like all purpose cluster with auto scaling, and second is Databricks serverless compute, because job cluster is where you definitely need a capacity definition, and dedicated cluster you need to define a lot of things. So A and B seems to be more suitable, but out of A and B, how why we choose B is because the second part of the question, where they say the team needs to ensure batch job runs within a fixed SLA while avoiding over provisioning and manual infra management. All purpose cluster with auto scaling would definitely come with uh, certain manual management of cluster, and therefore B is the most appropriate and correct answer. The second question is, a team of analysts complains about cluster startup delays for interactive queries. So definitely um, not the job cluster or something like that, right? The engineers want to minimize spin up time while still using the shared compute resources efficiently. Which feature should they use? So the clue in the question is they complained about the startup delays for interactive queries, right? So no one wants to wait for it. And if no one wants to wait for it, the only option that we have is instance pool, because in all other cases, whether it's auto scaling or job cluster, in both the cases, there is an acquisition of cluster and one has to acquire cluster to run them. Instance pool is the only place where you have some planned capacity ready and you can utilize it. So therefore, since the clue is startup delays, no startup delays are needed for the interactive queries. Instance pool is the only answer. Scaling worker nodes. While Databricks feature allows a cluster to automatically increase or decrease the number of worker nodes depending on workload demand. So which database cluster is there which allows all these things? Which property allows all these things? It's the cluster autoscaling. Cluster autoscaling allows an increase and decrease of a cluster size. What is the benefit of instance pool? Okay, warm up. There is no pre-warmed. They are all pre-warmed basically, so no warm-up time is required, which makes C as the most appropriate answer, which says that to reduce the cluster start time and reusing the pre-warm instances, pre-warm virtual machines, VMs. Okay, so whenever there is a question related to instance pool, what clue you should look for is there is no warm-up time, pre-warm-up time. Okay, now and just for the sake of definition, we'll understand these concepts of auto scaling. Okay, so auto scaling is a property which is available for the cluster where you give where you don't give a size, fixed set size, but you give a range. Okay, it it adds workers when load increases, so it starts off with the minimum size, and if it is able to continue that, it is okay. If the load increases, then the size of the cluster also keep on increasing. Whenever there is a seasonal use case, auto scaling can be one option, but then nowadays since Databricks has serverless capacity available, so serverless takes a preference over auto scaling. If the use case suits all around the serverless, then serverless is the preferred answer. What is an instance pool? As I mentioned, if we don't have time to uh, wait for the cluster acquisition, so whenever we set up a cluster, what happens is the Databricks would go to your cloud service provider, which is Amazon, Azure, or Google, and try to acquire the machines. So while trying to acquire the machine, it takes some time. Let's say 5 to 6 minutes of a startup time where it acquires the cluster, and then finally it sets up the cluster with all the installations and all. Right. So if you don't want to spend this time, if you have some SLAs or pre-warmed up instances are needed for some of the use cases, then in such case, serverless is the only option we have, or having an instance pool. First option is having an instance pool. If you could get the pre-warmed instances, then that is a option, and if those are not present, then the only option that remains with you is to go for is to go for the serverless. Okay. So key takeaways are like auto scaling saves cost and ensure SLA compliance by dynamically resizing the cluster. Instance pool reduce startup time and keep pre-warmed instances ready. They can again be often used together to make sure that the jobs are finished within SLAs. Seasonal spike, if you get a question of seasonal spike, search for pre-warmed up instances or serverless or auto scaling. So, and depending on your use case, you can take a choice. So these are the questions that we learned today. Thank you for listening. We'll again, please do subscribe so that you can get the next set of videos. Thank you.